combatants from the war's northern front, anti-tank missiles, air defense, infantry anti-tank rockets, air-launched munitions, armored weapons, artillery. These are just some of the weapons that China has been putting on the arms market in recent years. I am Commander Robinson Farinazo, a Navy Reserve officer, and this is Arcanjo Arte de Guerra, a channel for military, strategic, and geopolitical analysis made by professionals. In today's video, we will talk about China's military growth, which is quite alarming. But before we start, I would like to ask you to subscribe to our channel, give it a like, and follow our social media. That said, let's get to today's video. Well, yesterday we made a video talking about a very important figure in the American Armed Forces, which is General Keane. General Keane made a video, which I'll share with you here, on Fox News, stating that the Chinese military expansion is a reality, and the United States will have a lot of difficulty dealing with it. Here's what happens. Let's situate how these things started. If we look back to the 1980s, the Chinese army was a derivative of the Soviet army, an army that was beginning to invest in mechanization, had an air force that was entirely a copy of Soviet aircraft, an incipient navy. In short, it was a rather backward army by world standards. However, China began to notice something. The turning point for the Chinese, the watershed moment, as the Americans call it, was the Gulf War. They observed the military performance of the United States, and all the alarms went off. They said, look, we are falling behind. This is the truth. So, from then on, China invested doing what it knows best, which is economies of scale. So what is that? Chinese companies began working on the mass production of weapons. They were major exporters. That's the truth. You could already find Chinese weaponry worldwide in the 1980s, though not with today's quality. However, they started investing not only in scale, but also in the improvement of equipment. So, for example, today, China has very advanced fighter jets. You see, for instance, not only this new fighter they launched, which is a trimotor, but also the previous generation of Chinese jets, which are in no way inferior to the American ones, and now they are starting to gain market expansion. I believe the following. These sanctions that the United States imposed have significantly harmed the American arms market. Why? Because they create a crisis of confidence among buyers. The guy says, look, I'm going to buy a plane today, but tomorrow I don't know if Washington will sanction the sale of spare parts, the supplies I need. Whereas China doesn't have that issue. They sell to you and will keep selling. They're not too worried about that. So what happens? And also, with the recent attacks on the dollar, de-dollarization, I believe that soon China will have a very significant presence in the international arms market. This market has always been dominated by the United States, Russia, and European countries, mainly the United Kingdom, France, and Germany. Italy too, to a greater or lesser extent. But what happens? Now, the Chinese are coming in full force. I don't think the European defense industry is a match for the Chinese. That's already out of the question. At the moment, it's still the Americans and the Russians. But the Americans are going to face a major setback starting in December because China is restricting the export of rare earths to the United States, those rare minerals, gallium, etc. And these minerals are extremely important for the U.S. defense industry, especially for cutting-edge technology. So I think the Chinese are going to outmaneuver the United States. Now, one of the most important aspects of China's military growth is the Navy. How did the Chinese Navy expand? We have to look at one thing. It wasn't just the Chinese who expanded. The Americans fell behind. Why is that? I will explain in a very didactic way. When President Ronald Reagan took office in the United States, around 1981, what did he start doing? cutting expenses, government expenses. So they thought the American government was spending too much on incentives for the naval industry. They cut those expenses. Today, the U.S. naval industry, which once represented more than 60% of global production, doesn't even reach 1%. But he didn't coordinate with the Chinese, South Koreans, Japanese, etc. This group continued investing in the shipbuilding industry. Today, China produces more than 50% of the world's ships, and it has an advantage. Chinese shipyards, which have 230 times the capacity of American shipyards, are all dual purpose. So what happens? They manufacture civilian ships most of the time, but when they are idle, they also produce military ships. Meanwhile, American shipyards either manufacture military ships and sell them to the American government or produce nothing. That's the truth. China is now entering a market it was previously absent from, which is the cruise ship market. They didn't manufacture cruise ships before, but now they are. So we can be sure that in the coming years, China is likely to dominate this market as well. And the Chinese expansion, especially the Chinese naval expansion, is overwhelming, right? That's what I said. The United States fell behind and China advanced. I wrote an article a long time ago saying that the U.S. Navy was a paper currency navy. And it's true. It is estimated that by 2030, China will have 450 ships compared to about 296 of the American Navy. In other words, it is 50% larger than the United States Navy. It's no use saying, oh, but in tonnage, the American Navy is bigger. The Chinese have already deployed a 40,000-ton amphibious ship, which is a lot. So, even that argument is flawed. The only argument still in favor of the United States Navy, with the Chinese already catching up to them in terms of naval aviation, is the strength of the American submarines, which is very good. That's the truth. Good submarines with excellent technical quality, but the Chinese are catching up. And we can't doubt that Russia will pass submarine technology to China, and Russia has excellent submarine technology. Another thing we have to note is that the Chinese have made organizational reforms in their army. So I have the paper here beside me. They created joint commands, which is very important for the integration and optimization of all branches of the armed forces, and they also did a good job professionalizing their military. China also increased its defense spending. They claim that in 2023, they would have expenditures of $225 billion. Look, it's hard to know if that's true or not, but we have to consider one thing. The dollar in China goes a long way. The Chinese naval industry, the Chinese military industry, doesn't have the corruption problems of the American industry, which I've mentioned here several times. You see how much was spent to build the Bradley, the problems with the F-35, the American LCS, the Zumwalt, and a series of other issues. You don't hear about problems of this kind in China. When they introduce a product, it is already consolidated. That's the truth. So you can multiply those 225 billion by 3 or 4. I think China is spending as much or more than the United States. If not in absolute terms, at least in parity, they are doing the same thing. Another important point is that China is gradually seeking to expand its global presence. So there is already a Chinese base in Djibouti. They are not like the Americans, who have 800 bases. But it happens that these trade agreements that China makes, especially port construction agreements, like the port of Shanghai, they recently did in Peru, all the infrastructure for it to be a naval base in the future.
Toda a estrutura para no futuro ser uma base naval. E esse país, eles têm acordos comerciais muito vantajosos com a China.
And this country has very advantageous trade agreements that China is unlikely to break. So China is actually building a web of very good relationships in the economic field that could benefit it militarily in the future. We also cannot overlook that the Chinese like innovations and are investing in artificial intelligence. Chinese drone technology is simply fantastic. I've already posted several videos of those movements they make with multiple drones in the sky. Hypersonic missile technology as well. China has turned the Taiwan Strait into a real minefield.
A China transformou o Estreito de Taiwan ali num verdadeiro paliteiro. A Marinha Americana teria dificuldade de operar ali.
The American Navy would have difficulty operating there due to the number of Chinese hypersonic missile launchers. Another thing the Chinese are developing now, which has recently emerged, is electronic warfare capability. They have an excellent naval electronic warfare system. It can no longer be underestimated. In the past, up to about 5 years ago, we didn't hear about Chinese electronic warfare. Today, we hear about it more and more. So what happens? We start to see that if there was a gap between the American and Chinese armed forces, it has either closed or diminished significantly, becoming almost imperceptible. I say this because we take a general, for example, like Kenny, Jack Keane, and I always say he's a very centered person. I recently made a video talking only about his work, but we see other military personnel who lean more towards patriotism, like Sampa Powell, who is an excellent admiral, naval aviator, F-14 pilot, but is more of a nationalist, etc. But even people like Paparo are starting to concede. China is a tremendous military challenge for the United States. That's the truth. I think the following. I see it this way. Taiwan is a Chinese problem.
Taiwan é problema chinês. A verdade é essa. É uma questão chinesa. Não diria nenhum problema.
The truth is this. It's a Chinese issue. I wouldn't say it's a problem. It's a Chinese issue. The United States and Europe, which are far away, if they get involved in this issue, they will bring upon themselves an elephant. They will put a goat in the room that they didn't need. Europe already has enough problems. Getting involved in Taiwan, I think, is a very big mistake. Because China will not give up Taiwan, not only because it's a matter of honor to recover the island, but also because Taiwan, a pro-Western Taiwan, is a threat to China's strategic surroundings. They will not tolerate this at all. They didn't tolerate it in Korea in 1950. They didn't tolerate it against the Soviet Union. They didn't tolerate it against Vietnam in 1979. China is very assertive regarding threats to its strategic surroundings.
As ameaças do seu entorno estratégico. Essa é que é a verdade. Então, eu penso o seguinte.
This is the truth. So I think as follows. The trend is for China to increasingly expand its military capabilities. There's no point in neglecting it, saying that Chinese equipment is bad. It's not. I showed you all these catalogs here, which I always collect at defense fairs I attend, right? We have a great interest in knowing what they are doing. And the Chinese defense industry is on par with the rest of the world. They are as assertive as when they tried to buy Vibraz. This is true. What Brazilians didn't realize, the Chinese on the other side of the world started to notice. They said, that company is worth it. Only we don't see it. So I think the trend is for the Chinese to bring their economic and manufacturing expertise to the military field. And you can't disregard the Chinese. I see a lot of people saying, oh, the Chinese don't have military experience. Nonsense. The United States has all the military experience in the world and keeps losing wars. And we see that the Chinese left a tremendous trauma on the United States in the Korean War in 1950. So today's video is actually a summary of the Chinese military expansion. I think there has never been, as people say, and even Kenny acknowledges, such a vast, rapid, and high-quality military expansion since World War II as the Chinese one. I'll leave the video, both the one I made yesterday about General Kenny and also the video of the interview he gave to Fox News, talking about China's military expansion. It's worth taking a look. But right here, tell us what you think about the Chinese military expansion, what the Chinese objectives are, what you think about the quality of their weaponry, and the Chinese preparedness for war. Also, write where you are speaking from. The Arte de Guerra channel wants to know more about its subscribers. Mention which state and city you are speaking from. Your comment is very important. Besides expressing your opinion, you help the growth of our media. Anyone who wants to help with the super sticker or super chat also helps the YouTube algorithm. You can also contribute through Pix, which is in the description. We'll be back soon with other productions, always with responsibility and commitment. Faith in Brazil, folks. See you later.
Compromisso. Fé no Brasil, pessoal. Até mais.